Hello, good evening, viewers, and a warm welcome to tonight's edition of Matters Arising, where tonight we'll be discussing labor and the economy, in special relation to the public sector and their impact on the economy. My name is Kofi Owusu-Ansah, assistant for your regular host, Akumba Ben. And tonight we have three gentlemen here to help us do the discussion. To my immediate right is Patrick Stevenson, who is the coordinator for research of think tank IMANI Ghana. And next to him is Sydney Casely-Hayford, who is a financial analyst. And to my extreme right is Danso, who is a labor consultant. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Now, to start with, let's look at the public sector. When we talk of the public sector, let's help viewers appreciate this. What category of people are we looking at? When we talk about the public sector, let me start with you, Patrick.
Okay, so when we talk about the public sector, basically you're making reference to people that you find within the public service, those you find in the civil services, and etc. So essentially you're looking at those that operate within the ambience of government, if you like. So you're looking at all three arms of government. Essentially these people are supposed to be ensuring that the business of governance that we have within the country is well structured and is moving.
Right. Now, Sydney, let me come to you. How crucial, really, do you think is the labor force within the public sector to the economy? Is there any correlation at all between, labor and the economy, especially in relation to the public sector?
Well, yes, there is. There's a direct correlation. Every service that falls in the public domain is given to us by public servants. Civil servants are there to support issues that crop up in the civil service realm, which will be in the arenas of civil society and civil society's delivery of services that are conducive to the well-being of the country. So in all ways, labor is an essential part of the public service. It constitutes a huge majority of the number of people who actually service the people of the country, and they are the fundamental core that makes the country revolve.
Right. Now, but would you, say that the public sector has really achieved that mandate of being one of the driving forces behind the economy? And we are talking about Ghana here. Has our public sector really lived up to that mandate?
The public sector performance cannot be divorced from the government of the day. Well, they are the machinery on the ground that implement government policies. Okay, and therefore, if things are moving well, it means that they are also performing their duty, and therefore you cannot divorce the performance of public sector employees from the performance of the government as a whole. The two are completely linked together.
I don't know if you share the same sentiments.
No, obviously, if I share the same sentiments to the extent that you have the public servants, or if you like the civil servants, that ensure that the machinery of government is right and is well greased to ensure that at least policies that are formulated that are supposed to ensure that we have economic growth and general development within the country are moving, then you'd expect that you can conclude that to some extent the public servants are working. But where you get difficulties and inconsistencies as far as things concerning development and economic growth come up, then you begin to ask fundamental questions about the people that work within the machinery of government. In essence, you'll be questioning the public servants, right from those that are in the executive to the legislature to ministries, departments, agencies, and whatever you. So there is some kind of a chicken and egg problem there.
Yet we've had government come out, severally to complain about low productivity within the public sector, but we are being made to understand that the two are actually two sides of the same coin.
Maybe let me step back. Because I'm not sure I quite agree with the statement that you cannot devolve the public sector from the government. Government policy is meant to be implemented by your civil service and your public service. But you can have a government that is non-performing, but the civil service program and the public service still delivers according to what they're supposed to do. I think that the accelerated benefits of having a harmony between the government and the civil and public service is what will generate a lot more and probably provide a lot more of the type of connectivity that we are talking about. Because you see, when the civil service and the public service are not motivated or do not feel that the leadership is of a good enough quality leadership, they tend to just carry on in a mundane way. But there are always also people who have affiliations on partisan lines. So you're not always going to get the kind of cooperation you want all the time. As much as we like to say that civil and public servants are not supposed to be partisans because they will always be there irrespective of what government comes and goes, it's a natural human thing that some people do get biased, and some civil servants will be asked to step aside when a new government takes over because they are perceived to be of one partisan ilk or the other. So I don't think that there's that direct harmony and that one-to-one correlation that we are probably trying to determine here.
The civil service or the public sector does not necessarily mirror, the government in power.
I don't think so. I don't think so, because to do that will say that technical competence of the civil service is reduced when the government in power is not performing well. But that doesn't make sense, because my technical ability and my professional delivery, irrespective of who is in power, should work. I deliver to them what they ask of me in my capacity to my background in my training work. So my intellect and my ability and my technical know-how cannot diminish simply because there's a change of government. Rather, my cooperation can be tarnished, my cooperation can be tampered, but it will not diminish in any way.
Right. Now, Mr. Champo, let me take your view on this. Do you actually share the sentiments of government? And like I've stated, government has complained incessantly about the low productivity within the public sector, coming on the backdrop of the huge financial commitment. We're hearing that close to about 70% of government revenue goes into the payments of salaries and emoluments of public sector workers. Do you share in the sentiments that perhaps the productivity is not commensurate with the financial commitment?
There has been this cry over a long period that the public sector is not productive. But sometimes I wonder why that complaint is. Because if you look at Article 190, it lists out that the institutions that constitute public services in Ghana. It's a tall list of people, and they all have their own appointees, chief directors, and all sorts of people. Workers, they take their bath, they go to work. They need to be told what to do. If you set up the machinery very well, definitely you have something to do. But sometimes maybe the chief directors themselves are not doing anything. So how do you pass it on? So they need a whole re-engineering, and to ensure, because for the workers, they've gone to work by their own competences, they've been put in various areas. So if you later complain that they are not working, then who to blame? So the whole system has to be re-engineered in such a way that there will be supervision. Because the workers there, most of them are competent, they have the qualification, everything there. But if nobody is supervising, then you are not going to expect that any good delivery will come. Because if you're talking about the civil service, you're talking the judicial service, the audit service, education service, the prison, parliamentary, health service, statistical, all these institutions have been mentioned in here. And they're all playing their own roles, as Casely was saying, and therefore may have their own competencies in there. But if you put the total output, as to the time things are supposed to be delivered, is that the way it should be done?
So lack of, if I'm getting you right, the lack of structured systems and institutions
and good supervision.
Yeah, and
so if you go into the public sector,
as accounted for.
Yes, if you go into the private sector, it's the same Ghanaians who are working there, like Valco in other big establishments. They are there.
Yes, we'll come in detail to the factors that has led to if any, the low productivity. But I quickly want to take your view on the productivity within the public sector. What is your view? Honest view on it?
Well, I like the way you qualify it, honest view. I mean, to be very sincere with you, it might interest you to know that, like they rightly mentioned, you have some people working in the public sector, and most of the time you find these same individuals having their private businesses running in the private sector. These businesses are not collapsing. You see some of these businesses flourishing. So, I mean, it only brings home the point that there's something fundamentally wrong when we connote the perception of government and the public sector generally. Now, you begin to ask certain fundamental questions, things concerning monitoring and evaluation. You're asking questions about the government in office, the commitment of the government to ensure that at least productivity within the public sector is something to write home about. But then again, if you don't have a cohesive system that, as it were, would ensure that all the necessary apparatus of state working to get what it is that we all expect them to do, then there's a systemic breakdown. Now, every serious government or every serious administration system will have to test the pulse of that system to find out exactly what the problems are and put in the right mechanisms to ensure that these problems are ameliorated. The funny thing, though, is that we have all the rules, all the regulations, all the legislations that, if in a utopian society, are all followed, we shouldn't see what we see today. Well, I mean, that is the essence of the discussion here, right? We're seeing a case where we're pumping in a lot into the public sector. Yes, we're not getting back whatever it is we're giving to them. And so, for me, we can now think about not just the regulations and legal systems that exist to ensure that they work, but we start asking questions about the kind of people and the objectives that are set, and essentially question the operations of the public sector. That is the only way we can move forward.
Now, Sydney, I'd like to take your views on this. You share sentiments experience.
Well, you know, look, I am trying. I just heard you say something, and I started running some numbers in my head. You said that the wage bill is 70% of what?
Of total government revenue.
Total government revenue. 70% of total government revenue. Does anybody in this country today, those of us in the public domain,
which actually we hear has been declining, you know, for the past few years now?
Well, absolutely. But does anybody know what the actual public revenue is? How much money, as of last month, September ending, 9 months in the year? Does anybody actually know how much revenue this government generated? I don't know. I have figures up until the end of August. I don't know, Mr. Champo, do you have any numbers? I don't know. And I go to the government websites all the time to try and find out whether new updates and new information is available. All I can tell you is that when we did the budget for 2013, our targeted revenue was 22 billion cedis. Our targeted expenditure was 30 billion cedis. So we were planning a fiscal deficit of 8 billion. Now, I would like to know what the 70% is. 70% of what? Is it of my revenue? And if it is of my revenue, then it makes the figure 15.4 billion, doesn't it? Yeah? And if it's of my expenditures, it makes that figure 21 billion. That's 70% times 30 billion is 21 billion. So I don't know what number has been used to calculate this 11 billion that is supposed to be, you know, the total wage bill. But if that is the total wage bill, then it's 11 billion of what? 22 billion, which makes it 50%, not 70%. And if it's 11 billion of 30 billion, then that figure is even lower, because it's somewhere just a little bit above 1/3. Is
it in any way to suggest that, you know, perhaps you know, our financial institutions are being a bit economical with the truth?
I would say that somebody should tell me exactly what that number is based on, so that I can put in my head what, you know, we're looking about. When we start talking productivity, you want to be sure that when productivity is how much am I spending, how much am I getting out of it, all right? If somebody is very efficient and you give them 2,000 cedis, they might convert that 2,000 into 10,000 cedis. Somebody who is less efficient might only convert it to 5,000 cedis. So that you have a productivity issue, you have an income generation issue or a creativity issue. Now, if I am to look seriously at productivity, then I really must understand that, are we really seriously saying that 70% of all our expenditures or all our revenues is going into wages? I just need somebody to say what the benchmark is, what the baseline is, what the denominator is, so we can understand it. Then I can start making some analysis. But based on what we're hearing, if at this time of the year, in August roundabout now, I can tell you that the deficit as of the end of August was about 5.6 billion between revenues and expenditures. Okay, Okay, I can also tell you very categorically, because these are numbers that are on the Ministry of Finance websites or on the Bank of Ghana websites. You can find that figure. The latest Bank of Ghana MPC press release, which they issued, did some extrapolation and came out with what the revenue figures were going to be. And in fact, they even published figures that are ahead of what the Ministry of Finance itself releases. So when I look at those numbers, I'm saying that our deficit is 5.6 billion. We have been against budget. We have been deteriorating ever since the beginning of the year. We haven't achieved budget. Now, if you were to ask me, is my labor being productive? Tell me what my base is so that I can estimate exactly what that productivity has translated into. And it is the productivity of the public service. How do you measure productivity in the public service? Let's take, for example, well, I'm hogging the airwaves. I don't want to, so if anybody has anything to say, you can just say so. But you take the Registrar General's Department, for example, which I believe is a public institution. Yes. Take the Registrar General institution. They have certain benchmarks at which point they will actually deliver certain registration documents. So they're saying that you come to register your business can be registered within 7 days. If you come for a change of director's name, it is X number of days. If you come for this, it is so many days. Now, if nobody is watching whether the turnaround time between when I submit my forms and when I actually get my registration back is not fitting within my 7 or my 14 days, how do I measure that productivity? And is anybody measuring that productivity? I think we are bandying the word around and we are substituting the word inefficiency for productivity. All right, so we need to be careful which one we're trying to articulate. And in this case, I will say to you that many of the indices that we have in the public sector, in the civil service, are not measurable, or are not being measured, even if they were measurable.
Right. Now let me bring you in here, Mr. Champon. I find it very interesting, the line of argument that Casely is raising, especially since the TUC itself has also challenged, the government figures, if I understand, that, the TUC has challenged government to actually come out with a list of those who are, being paid what within the public sector. Because in times we find that government has always made a case about a single spine and so on and so forth. Yet the TUC, it appears, seems to believe that not everybody is on the same wavelength within the public sector. What is your take on this?
Oh, it's true. If you look at the total number of people who derive their income from the consolidated fund, it's a huge number of people. By any time government is talking, they create impression as if those in the organized group are the ones who are benefiting from the bulk of the money from the consolidated. That's not true. As Casely was saying, nobody has done any empirical, brought out any empirical data to support any of the arguments. We are all throwing political things around as to who is taking what and what is, But we need now to know exactly what is happening. Most of these expenditure go on recurrent expenditure, in terms of where people are staying, the vehicles and the fuel.
Are you by any indication referring to Article 71 office holders?
Yes, most of them, because they enjoy a lot of perks. Okay, ordinary workers, maximum 1,000 Ghana cedis that I've heard, even the police one that came. So it's not that huge money going into. If you look at the cost of living and the amount of money they receive, I mean, it's not something, because if really they were satisfied, I don't think this labor unrest would have been toned down.
Right.
But the agitation for more is coming every day. The anxiety of workers is daily increasing. So somebody needs to come out and examine these issues in a more serious manner.
Right.
So
Patrick, your views on this very interesting line of debates, where it would seem, or suggestions are being made to the effect that within the public sector front, a chunk of the so-called emoluments and salaries are concentrated within a privileged few, I might add.
To respond to your question, I think it would be fair if we put the question as my difficulty is with lumping everything up and saying 70% of our revenue or whatever it is goes to the public sector. If you look at expenditure in the public sector, take wages and salaries for example, right? You have a case where you have things like ghost names that is equally being leaked out. You have cases of inefficiencies. I mean, we hear from the Auditor General's report, Public Accounts Committee, etc. So when we're talking about government expenditure and the public sector, it is important that we factor all of these things into it so that it wouldn't seem or sound as though we're taking 70% of our revenue and giving to some small category of people within the country. My challenge there is that it might create a scenario, a situation that would look as though those people are benefiting. But the difficulty with that, we have serious leakages that if we don't pluck them, this kind of situation would be very difficult to grapple or wrap our heads around. So yes, we are all calling, on the fact that we're spending too much money in the public sector, but we should ask the fundamental questions. Where are these monies being spent? What percentage of that money going to? What is being leaked out? How do we plug these leakages? And collectively, I'm sure we'll be moving forward as far as this discussion is concerned.
Yeah, but how would you describe the significance or the impact of, say, a policy like the single spine salary structure on the public sector wage bill? Because government has always made the argument that the policy is unsustainable and it is crippling the
We tend to play trial and error policy in this country. For those of us that are interested in numbers and research, you realize that, look, let's even take prior to 2012 elections. We were all excited. Politicians in this country politicized single spine. It was the baby of the day. Everybody was excited. That is what the campaign message was on. And credible institutions that run the numbers, communicated to government and people who were going around with a single spine as a campaign message that there is something fundamentally wrong. You can't pay people based on certificate. You can't. It just defies economic logic.
Wasn't it supposed to address discrepancies and incoherencies within the public sector pay structure?
How would you want to address these discrepancies? Because people are on the same job, or because the people are being efficient in what they do? I think it's gotten to a point where we should learn to wear as a country sometimes private sector hat in certain activities that we undertake in the public sector. Because if you take a typical private sector businessman, you're not paying an employee because of a certificate they have or because of a qualification they might have. You're paying them based on what value they're able to contribute or add to your business organization. If we wear that hat, sometimes in the public sector, it is going to solve some of these problems, because I don't see how somebody wakes up all of a sudden and because of a policy that's been instituted, the salary jumps up by, say, 1,000%, when we have not calculated to know clearly what that person or that particular job the person is doing is actually contributing to the purse, so we'll be able to pay out this kind of amount. So if you throw all of this into the leakages that we have, then you get the problem we have today.
Right. Sydney, your view on the single spine as a contributory factor to the public sector wage bill conundrum that we are
single spine. You see, from what I know, or in what I understand, the whole concept of this single spine thing has been bastardized in many ways. The whole idea, I thought, when we mooted this thing of having a pay structure that would make sense, was to collapse all the various allowances and perks and other things that government, public servants and civil servants were given, and just give them a paycheck, one single paycheck, and let them take care of themselves. It meant that you would stop giving them fuel vouchers. You would start giving them per diem allowances when they're doing their local job. You will stop giving them big 4x4 Pajero cars to drive around. You will stop giving them canteen vouchers, which they get in Parliament House and all of the other places. All of those things were going to go, and would give them a paycheck, which means that they are responsible for their own homes. They have to go and find their own homes, buy their own cars, take care of their own children's school fees, worry about how to fuel their cars, etc., 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 just like you and I have to do. That, I thought, was the idea when it was started. Somewhere along the line, we've come up with a very complex and complicated thing. The whole idea behind finding parity between different jobs was to say something like this: if you have a health officer who is in Accra, and that health officer happens to have 4 or 5 layers above him in reporting lines before the ultimate decision maker, he gets a certain salary and he gets a certain grade for his responsibility. But his responsibility 5 tiers down the line, so he doesn't sign off on as many things as the person at the top. If you take that same district officer and you take him to a faraway land in Bumbruguyoyo, you put him there, and he happens to be the senior chief medical person there. Not necessarily, he hasn't become a doctor, but he has been given responsibility to ensure that his district hospital runs. Therefore, there is a certain responsibility grade that he should get, and which therefore translates into some monetary value because he's being given that responsibility. Then you also have a hardship grade, that because he's in a deprived area or he's in a community where it is not as beneficial as here in the urban center, he also gets further points. So he gets more translation points into value. This is how I understood the whole thing was going to be done. Now all I hear is agitation for not putting us on the right benchmark and
market
but
premiums,
still, we're still running the system where members of parliament are given cars, they are giving fuel, they are giving cheap loans, they are giving cheap housing opportunity, etc., etc., etc. So it defeats the purpose for what we are trying to do. I mean, why is it that a member of parliament thinks they should be entitled to a bodyguard and a motorcade? Okay? It doesn't make any sense. They already have a good salary package. They're on 7,000 cedis or something now, plus they get HIPIC allowance, plus they get district assembly common fund allowances, plus they get so much other support. When you add it all up, your servant in Parliament House, is his package of benefit to him is between 11 and 12,000 cedis, based on his aggregated allowances and benefits that he gets. Now, these are the kind of things that you don't hear, and nobody wants to talk about it, because then this is the real thing that the TUC was referring to, that all these allowances we pay to these people, it pales the single spine worker who is agitating to be put on a certain scale so he can benefit from another 100 or 200 cedis a month, pales into significance when you look at what these other groups of persons are getting. So the whole productivity schedule thing that we are talking about needs to be broken down very, very clearly. And it comes back to the thing that we're always talking about in the media these days. Governments come and they promise us transparency, accountability. And then when you start demanding the transparency and accountability, then they start putting impediments in your path, and you're not able to get the information so you can understand it and ask questions. So you're asking me a question on productivity. You're asking me to tell you whether or not the civil service is productive. I can't tell you. I don't have the data that will enable me to do a detailed enough analysis and do a calculation, even if it's a simple one, to tell you what these ratios are.
Right. Now, Achampo,